All right. Well, welcome. I'm Tim Benson with OmahaBound, joined by another Tim from Nerd in the Noke to talk about comic binding and probably mostly just Daredevil and our shared interest and what brought us together. So OmahaBound, we've been doing comic binding and publishing and stuff like that for a long time, and we go where the wind takes us. So we go off tangent, make a lot of side projects, and do things like this, just kind of whatever comes up. So during this pandemic, we've decided to create some more video content and answer a lot of questions about binding, and then reach out to some of the people in our little niche of a niche community to get face to face a little bit. So Tim, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Tim Burnham from Roanoke, Virginia. That's kind of where the Noke portion of the Nerd in the Noke comes from. That's actually my blog. It started almost 10 years ago as mostly movie reviews. And then as I got more and more into comic books, it kind of spiraled into kind of a mashup of movie reviews, comic book reviews, kind of whatever. Yeah, hey, there it is. Kind of whatever I was into and liking at the time. So it's I've actually fallen behind a bit the last few months. Life has been life, and then the pandemic's been the pandemic. But it's not been updated. The main page hasn't been updated for a few months, but I have a couple side projects, like a Daredevil Collected Edition reference spreadsheet that I've been running for 3 years that I constantly update, and a Thor by Jason Aaron reading order that I also constantly update. Doesn't take a whole lot of updating now that the run's over. Mostly just updating what editions are in print and whatnot. But anyway, it's just kind of a hobby, and just, there are a few people like yourself that seem to have similar interests and like to hear what you think about things, and that's just kind of what it was. So that's that. But huge Daredevil fan. Been picking up. I was a late bloomer when it comes to comics. I was the baseball card kid growing up. Got into comics after college. So I've been doing comics for, 15, 16 years now. That brings us to now, I guess.
So what was your when you got into comics, what were some of the titles that got you in?
Well, I oddly enough, the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie is kind of what spurred my interest. At the time, I was aware of Daredevil, but didn't know a whole lot about the character. Enjoyed the movie, so I went looking for books to read. At that point in time, we were 4 or 5 years after the Kevin Smith relaunch. Yep. So I started with Guardian Devil with Smith and Quesada. Really enjoyed that, and then when my buddy across town, David, heard that, he said, "Hey, if you like Guardian Devil, let me introduce you to a gentleman by the name of Frank Miller." And all downhill from there, in a good way. But the first issue of Daredevil I actually picked up from my local comic book shop, B&D Comics, got to give them a plug, was actually issue 51 of the Marvel Knights relaunch, which, as you're kind of
doing the math,
as you're thinking in your head, you're like, that's kind of odd. Yeah, my first issue of Daredevil had Daredevil in it for maybe a total of 3 pages, because that was the beginning of that David Mack arc, the Echo arc, right in the middle of the Bendis run.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, kind of started picking up loose issues there, worked my way backwards and forwards, eventually read all of the Daredevil.
So you've read 1 to
I've read
600 or whatever we're on?
I've read everything, and I'm presently working on actually piecing together volume 1.
Okay.
Which I had always, not to get too far off the binding topic, but had always kind of figured, coming from my baseball card collecting days, I used to collect sets, and I wanted all of everything. So when I started collecting Daredevil as a comic, I started with, the Marvel Knights relaunch, and have been picking it up since. So I've got everything from 1998 #1 bingo to present. And I always said, I don't want to collect volume 1 because what are the odds that I'm ever going to get a #1 or a 1 through 10 or whatever? And as you are eyeballing, back in January, my comic shop sent me a message in the middle of it one Friday, and they said, hey, we just got a run of 100-something Daredevil books. Is it something you might be interested in? And I said, well, probably. But in my head, I'm thinking, this has got to be
issues 250 to 380.
It's got to be the stuff that I already have, or later on in the run. So I said, well, is it, what is it? Because I've got everything from 98 #1 till now. And she replied with the first volume, #1 to da 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 da. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh man, you're gonna make this real hard on me. I was like, I don't have the kind of money for this. And it was a collection that they got in on consignment. And she told me right off, she said, I've graded these overly harshly because from her side of things, she didn't want to, quote a grade to somebody, have somebody buy it, send it off, have it not come back that well, and then have it be a whole, oh, you told me it was this and it's not.
Yeah.
So she had very heavily, harshly graded it as a 0.5 to a 1.
Yeah.
And then I saw the price she had attached to it, and I perked up. I was like, oh, I might be able to afford that. So I went over to the shop that afternoon, flipped through the whole pile. She's like, well, you tell me what you want, and we'll set it aside for you. And I said, well, I want all of them, but these are on consignment. The person you're selling these for is not going to want to wait for me to pay them off over 3 years, because that's what it would have taken.
Yeah.
And so she's like, well, pick out, the key, whatever ones you want, and then we'll figure something out. So that afternoon, I went home with this #1, which at the time was it was raw. It wasn't graded. As you can see, it came back as a 2.0, which I was ecstatic about because I was expecting it to be, way low. But I came home with that and Daredevil 158, which was the Miller's first issue. And then I told her, I said, hey, can I set aside like 2 through 10? I figured if I don't get those now, I probably never will.
Yeah.
So over the last couple months, I've gone ahead and paid those off and got a few others. And now I'm full on into the deep end of going ahead and finishing the other. So it's going to take a while, but now I have a new goal.
Nice. I work toward, so I read comics when I was a kid, but at some point, 5th grade, kind of walked away and, got into, I don't know, baseball or so, I don't know. And then in high school, got back into it because a friend of mine who I had a couple classes with just for like the entire year, or like junior or senior year of high school, he would just keep telling me about books, and I'd be like, yeah, that sounds fine, and but nah, I'm not gonna read that. And then eventually he got me with a Usagi Yojimbo
I've
book.
Actually never read that, but I've heard.
Yeah, we'll fix that. And I was like, oh, I remember this guy from the Turtles cartoons, and he's like, I hate you. So I was like, okay, and he gave me the perfect book because it had the turtles in it, and so and the turtles are stupid in comparison, and I was just hooked from that point on. So then I was like, okay, give me more. And so it didn't take long for me to then go to the comic shop and be like, okay, what's going on? And Daredevil, we were into the Kevin Smith run, and I think issue maybe 5 had come out, and I was like, okay, I'm a nerd, and I like Kevin Smith movies because I'm also stupid, and so I'm like, okay, Kevin Smith, this Daredevil guy, I know who he is, but didn't read it as a kid or anything. And so then I was hooked, and I went all in for Marvel Knights. I mean, every book they put out, I bought. And like Inhumans with Jenkins and Lee is probably one of my favorite books.
That's so good.
So Marvel Knights was huge. So I was able to meet Paul Miotti a couple times and kind of express my, that I was able to get into it. It felt stupid. I waited in line to meet him. It was a long line because it was him and Amanda. And I finally got like to Amanda, or I was like one person, next up in line, and the assistant was like, okay, what do you have for Amanda to sign? I was like, nothing. Like, I don't know who she is.
I'm not here for her.
Which I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know who she is. I was here for Jimmy, and they're like, okay, like, I guess you can go see him. So I showed. So I'm going to bring it back to binding for a second. So this is Glare. There we go. So this is the first 19 issues of the Kevin Smith run, and he.
Oh, that's awesome.
Threw a sketch in there, and I had made a Painkiller Jane book for him just as a gift. So I bound it and gave it to him as a gift, and so it was cool to meet him. And so that's how I got into Daredevil. And then of course I went back to Miller, and Marked for Death was the first trade paperback that I picked up. So and then so I started building the everything library, like every appearance, every crossover, stuff where he was in the background. Went way overboard, and then one day I was like, okay, this is crazy. I'm never going to do anything with these. And so I bound some of them. I put together some favorite runs, but then I actually traded off most of that collection for so Matt Kint. I was working with him on a project, and I was doing binding for him, and he wanted to put together the Daredevil Miller run. And so I actually bound my Miller issues for him, and traded him for some art and for some events we were doing. He did some stuff for us, and so
that's awesome.
So I've got a page of Matt Kint art that I traded some Daredevil comics to him for. So yeah. So that's your Daredevil backstory. How'd you find?
Enough, it's so funny because the not so good in hindsight movie is kind of what threw me in, which is really funny. And it still has, it's at the time, seeing the movie and then going back and reading, I knew who Kevin Smith was because of Clerks, Chasing Amy, Mallrats, all that. So that was kind of the natural place for me to start with the comics. And I was getting the references that the movie made. Like when they name dropped creators, I got that in the months prior as I was reading the books. But at the time I was like, this is pretty good. And now I'm just like, it's really not very good at all. It's really not. But it's got a special place in my heart because that's kind of what started it for me. So
I went to see it opening day, Valentine's Day, whatever year that was.
That weekend, I went with a couple friends because we were all just out of college and totally single and whatever. But it was fun.
Yeah, it's not a great movie, but I enjoyed it. Like in the moment, I had a good time, and I would watch it again. Maybe with full attention, but
in the background as I'm doing something else. The director's cut's actually not terrible,
except
it fills in a couple spots, but it's still not great.
Except the part where he drives.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah. So
But Coolio's in it, so
yeah. The suit though, I liked it. I liked the leather suit.
Yeah, it
So
wasn't bad.
cool. All right. So so how did you then go from Daredevil to your first bound book, or how did you find the binding
So it's
side
actually
of it?
okay. So I discovered binding uh, years ago. I can't put a time frame on it, but at some point in time, I was, I don't know, probably searching for some other Daredevil volume or something, and came across what I now frequent as the Marvel Masterworks forums and all that stuff. And at the time, I'm sitting there thinking, and this is coming from the baseball card side of things. I'm like, why on earth would you want to cut up your books? Like, I don't understand that. That doesn't make any sense. And so, as I became a more diverse reader of comics, and hey, these are stories that I enjoy, but oh wait, they're not collected anywhere, then I started to really kind of get it. Like, oh, okay, this is just a way for you to collect the books that you've got, your floppies, into something a little bit nicer and more readable, so you're not going in and out of bags and boards and stuff. And so I understood it a little bit better, but I still really didn't have much of any interest in actually doing it. And then probably, let's see, these first couple that I've got were done in 2018. So a couple years ago, for whatever reason, I got the bug to collect and bind Greg Rucka's and Marco Cacchetto's Punisher, because that's what it was. I went looking for the trade paperbacks.
Yeah.
Hey, you can't find them. They're just gone, out of
Yep.
print. And I was like, well, that's ridiculous. I'm like, the run's only 25, 26 something issues, about, give or take, to begin with. I was like, I'll just hit up the local con, then maybe Heroes Con, depending on, we're 3.5 hours from Charlotte, so we go to Heroes Con every summer, except this year, unfortunately. So anyway, I started picking up the loose issues, and that was kind of like, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bind those. And then I started looking at places to do it, and I had an idea in my head for, graphic cover, and I was like, if I'm going to do it, I want to do it as similar or as close to like an official, release as I can. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to go for my first bind. I'll go through Houchen. And at the time, they had a 3-book minimum.
Yeah,
so
I did that.
It's all your fault.
It really was. I was like so tired of the one book and how much work it takes to do one book for somebody.
Which I totally get.
Yeah.
I totally get that. But it's actually kind of funny. So I had the Rucka Punisher, and then at the same time I was like, okay, so huge Daredevil fan. Virtually everything from the beginning of volume 2 up to, well, at the time was, halfway through or getting through the Charles Soule era, but up to everything from 1998 to Wade was collected. Yep. With the exception of 5 issues called Playing to the Camera. It's the Bob Gale, one arc that was between Bendis and Max, 3-4 issues, and then Bendis Malieve taking over.
Yep.
This little bad boy. So I said, well, okay, I got to get to 3 volumes. I've got Rucka Punisher. Why don't I do this one arc of Daredevil? That'll fill my hole on my shelf. My shelf that's behind me, but there's pictures of it in multiple places online. And then a good friend of mine said, he's like, well, if you need a 3rd book, I'll throw in, because I want to collect Thunderstrike.
Okay.
And I said, okay. So we got to collecting all the issues, and then I was fortunate enough to piggyback off a login for Photoshop through work, and then kind of self-taught and bugged one of the guys at work to give me a few pointers, and managed to put together designs for 3 books, and we sent them in, and that was that. So yeah, so actually, oddly enough, the fact that I was forced to come up with 3 books to submit this order, thank you, sir, gave me this little playing to the camera, which is really, no offense to Mr. Gale or Mr. Winslade or Mr. Ross, not my favorite story arc, but I wanted to have it bound to fill the hole on my shelf, and it came out okay. But it was very plain. I didn't do a whole lot of bells and whistles on that, just because it was 6 issue arc.
Yeah.
But the big one I did at the time was the Rucka Punisher. I don't know.
And that had like a single issue or crossover with Spider-Man and Daredevil, or is that the next run?
This one, I'm trying to remember. So this had, there was a arc. It crossed over like 1 issue each with Wade's Daredevil and an issue of Spider-Man of some sort. I don't remember.
So Avenging Spider-Man. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. Yep, you got it. But so anyway, that was front, spine, back, and that's the dust jacket. And then I always loved this image of both Frank and Rachel.
Oh yeah.
This one actually took a little bit of effort. Like I said, very much a novice as far as Photoshop goes, and there were text caption boxes in about 3 places on this, and I managed to clean it up decently enough that it worked out pretty well. So that was that. And they turned out great. Probably much better than I had any right to have, with it being my first project.
Yeah.
My buddy turned out really happy with his Thunderstrike volume, which if anybody's curious about more pictures of this stuff, I've got posts on my Instagram, which is just at Nerd in the Noke. So they're on there. I've got to go back a year and a half or so, but they're all there.
Okay. Did I do those books when I was? If that says anything, like how many books we did.
Well, so I know the order policy at the time was still a minimum of 3 books. These were done April, May of 2018. I don't know what your timeline was.
Nope, I think I just left. So
I can't remember who it was that I had communicated with.
Probably Tom, but yeah,
that might be right. I don't know.
I was just pulling up. I've still got all the files from the 4 years I was at Houchin. I was like, I'm gonna pull up the file and see the Thunderstrike cover.
So it was actually really funny. I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh yeah, I had an idea of what cover I wanted on the front and back of my Rucka Punisher, and about the time I submitted it, I was just scrolling through, I think, the Marvel Masterworks forum, and sure enough, somebody else had used like the same 2 covers, and I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me! But theirs was, it was the on cover design, so at least mine's a little bit different in that.
Okay.
In that it's just the dust jacket. But yeah, at the time I thought I was all original, and I'm like, man, now I wonder if I had seen it previously and that had planted a seed somewhere in the back of my head. So I don't know, but
I found it on your website.
If I am a copycat, thank you very much for the idea to whomever beat me to it, because they were 2 great images.
Yeah. I've always been all ideas are free. If you see something, like we've all stolen over the years, we steal ideas. You just can't help that. Not maliciously, but you just can't help but be affected by what you see out there. And I've gotten requests from people that are like, oh, I want to use that cover. And it's like, okay, go for it. Yeah. I'm not gonna give it to you. Like
That's
if you want to
yeah.
steal the idea, at least go through the work of doing it yourself. And um, the one that I've probably gotten the most of is a Usagi Jimbo cover,
Mhm.
and it's super simple and white and plain.
I've
Um,
seen that in one of your videos.
yeah, and it's just like
It's really clean. It looks good.
yeah, and it's not hard at all. It's probably one of the easiest designs I've ever done. But yeah, I think we're all stealing from ideas. But I like how you did um, just like a big splash image on the book itself,
Mhm.
and then the dust jacket that's more publisher style and maybe looks official on the shelf. So
Yeah. Oh, and
uh,
total side note, but the really funny thing about this very short Daredevil run at the time had not been collected in any way, shape, or form because, like I said, compared to all the other Volume 2 material,
yeah,
doesn't quite. It's not bad. It just doesn't quite. The tone isn't nearly the same. It just doesn't quite add up. Probably about 2 weeks after I sent this bad boy in to get bound, Marvel announced their string of Marvel Knights anniversary trade paperbacks,
yeah,
and this story is in one of those trade paperbacks.
really.
Yeah,
I've been picking up a couple of those, like the Punisher, the Ennis Punisher books. I've gotten the first two of those. Guardian Devil, I picked up. I have it in other formats, but like I gave it to a friend. He sat on it and folded it in half. And like I don't care. It's just a
right.
reader copy. But I missed that one.
Yeah, it was. I think it's called Unusual Suspects. It's a hodgepodge
Okay.
collection. It's got Daredevil Ninja,
Oh, okay. I did see that.
and I think that the Daredevil Spider-Man like 3-issue
Yeah.
crossover, not crossover but miniseries, and maybe one of the David Mack stories.
Yeah.
I can't remember, but yeah, it's a total
Hmm.
mismatch collection. It's just like, hey, we're gonna take everything else from the Marvel Knights era of Daredevil and just cram it in this trade because they don't belong anywhere else.
Yeah. Bob threw a fit. Yeah. He's like, I want a book.
Everybody else has been reprinted but me.
Yeah.
And
Where's the
again,
Bob Gale Ultimate Collection?
well, there's not enough for
I
there to
know.
be an ultimate collection. And again, like I said, apologies to all of the creators. I don't hate it. It's just not as epic as the rest of it.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that book would have been perfectly fine 4 or 5 years prior. Had it been issues 381 through 385,
Agreed.
not even a blink. That's just would have been perfect in tone. But some things changed.
Yeah.
And for all we know, that story could have been written 5 years prior, or who
Very could have
knows.
been.
So
Yeah, it very well could have been. That's a good point. I had never thought of that.
especially with Marvel Knights, like even then, like they were still going through a lot of transition, and like Casada was moving out into the bigger the bigger house,
Right.
and you've got two people like Brubaker and Bendis. It's possible that their schedules didn't allow them to like start right away, and they could have gone to a backstory, but I'm just speculating. But yeah, it was a fine story. So, all right, so that's how you got into it. Punisher, Bob Gale, and
Yeah.
Thunderstrike.
I
You've done a
actually
couple books since then.
I have. Actually, to this day, side note, I have never read Thunderstrike. I know nothing about Thunderstrike other than it was like a Thor offshoot.
You're
one of these
good.
days, one of these days, maybe I'll get to read my buddy's book. But it turned out good. It's a good looking book, but I know nothing about it.
Yeah.
So I've actually, like I said, I've only done custom binds for a year and a half, almost 2 years now. So my completed stack is actually very small. I only have 2 other books that I did myself, and actually 2 others at all. I haven't purchased any from anybody else, but obviously a huge Daredevil fan. Charles Soule. actually really enjoyed his run coming off of Wade. Kind of took it a little bit darker again. A lot of people say that like Wade is so lighthearted, and I'm like, there's some really dark stuf in Mark Wade's run, folks.
It's colorful.
It's very colorful,
yeah.
and it's kind of presented in a slightly more happy-go-lucky manner, but it's dark.
Yeah.
I mean, you got graves being robbed and
purple children
and people dealing with cancer and just all kinds of stuff. So yeah, yes, there's a lot of funness with playfulness between Matt and Kirsten, who, by the way, is one of my favorite characters ever. I absolutely adore her. But yeah, so going into Charles Soule, I've got virtually the entirety of Daredevil's history in collected format on the shelves behind me. There's some holes, but those holes are really only there because that material hasn't been collected yet. As I'm sure you know, other than this Bob Gale story, virtually everything from 1998 #1 through Mark Waid is in a nice, oversized omnibus format. And in the back of my head, I keep thinking, Marvel will probably one day put together a Soule collection. They really like to lean into Daredevil when it comes to these oversized collections. However, I had a bit of a nerdy moment and submitted a letter at one point in time, and there was one letters page in the entirety of Charles Soule's run. It was in issue 598, and my letter got printed. So between wanting the run in something nicer than a trade paperback and knowing that if and when Marvel ever does an official collection, there is no way they're going to collect that one letters page for a modern run, I decided to go ahead and bind Soule Daredevil. 2 volumes, collects everything, including his Daredevil Punisher miniseries. So yeah, across 2 volumes, fronts, backs, and I did the same thing as I did on Punisher. I did dust jackets and art underneath. So I'll give you a quick look. This first one is Garney.
Nice, yeah.
Garney spread, just Daredevil flying through the air. And then volume 2, I used artwork from another artist who has become a personal favorite, one of my personal favorites over the last few years, Mike Henderson, also Daredevil flying through the air, but from the second half of the run. And where is it? Here we go.
There's your dog.
And this is, I am convinced, the only reason why they printed the picture. I was sitting there reading a new issue one night, new comic book day, sitting there reading an issue, and he crawled up in my lap and just kind of looked over his shoulder, and I snapped a quick picture. And then later on that night, I decided to write in a letter, and I attached the picture just to be goofy, and sure enough, it got printed. So that, nobody else is going to care, but that was just kind of like the little extra push I needed to go ahead and put these binds together. But of course, my collector's mentality, I was like, well, I've got all these singles, I've got them in my short boxes, but I don't want a hole in my short boxes, so I had to go down and track down
You bought another set?
Yeah, I bought another set for the binds. So that's just, what happens when you've got that collecting mentality and you've got to have all of something. It's a pain sometimes, but it is what it is.
Well, that picture of the dog, that's the only reason they made a letters page. They're like, we gotta print this,
I'm sure.
And the editor was like, I hate you. I hate you. I gotta make up answers. And, I think it's been a solid 18 months since that run ended, if not longer.
Just about, because let's see.
Because he didn't write
Soul
the
ended.
he didn't write the Man Without Fear mini.
Oh yeah, no.
No,
That
so
was Jed McKay.
yeah. So
Um,
there's that, and then 20 issues, 19 issues since then.
yeah, so Souls ended. I want to say something like November of 18, maybe, and then that Death of Man Without Fear, that by McKay, that ran for like one a week for like January or February or something,
Yeah.
and then Zdarsky and Kaketo took over, and they've been going. Well, fill in from other artists here and there, but they've been going ever since. And unfortunately, we're currently delayed because of the world.
Yeah.
But
Sounds like the middle of May.
yeah,
So.
hopefully, if we're lucky.
Yeah.
We'll
So
see.
I think that long, you would think they would have at least put out the first oversized hardcover.
One would think.
So
my thought process or why they may do it. Everybody's like, oh well, there's no oversized hardcovers. I said, well, they did single issues to trade paperbacks to omnibus for Brubaker. There are no regular oversized hardcovers for Brubaker's run. So I kept saying, I'm like, well, you know what? They're just going to wait until the run's complete. That way they'll know how to map it out, and then they'll just boom, boom.
yeah.
And that hasn't happened. So I feel real good about having done this because I would have been waiting even longer than I thought I would have been. So.
Yep.
But there's one other project that I have had in the works. I know I've talked to you about.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited, and that one, assuming it turns out as well as I hope it will probably become my new number one favorite as far as my binding projects goes, and that's the Daredevil by Ann Nocenti and John Romita Jr. and other artists, but he was the primary for most of it. So that I sent that off last fall, and then just due to unfortunate life events for all parties involved, has been delayed 2 or 3 different times and is now kind of in a COVID-19 limbo.
Yeah.
But as soon as that all gets cleared up, it should get the finishing touches and come home. So I'm really excited to see how that turns out.
Yeah, I think everything is stalled to some degree, and
totally understandable.
Yeah,
it's just it is what it is. It's unfortunate, but
so that's the whole Nocenti run. Every issue she did, or every issue that her and Romita did.
It's every issue that she did, including there's 2 or 3 like random issues in that run that other people did. I just went ahead and got the whole chunk. So from 236 to 282 or 3.
Okay.
I'm not looking at my really nerdy have to keep track of spreadsheet. But whatever the numbering was, it's all those, and including that Punisher issue that you had mentioned you picked up the other day, because that's like the same story as one of her issues, just from the other point of view. So and I actually included her just kind of like as bonus material or whatever. At the end, I threw in her little 4-issue Typhoid Mary miniseries that she did later on afterwards. It really has nothing to do with the rest of the run, but since she created Typhoid Mary, I was like, I'll throw it in there, and it kind of evened out the 2 volumes. I try to split them as evenly as I can, just so they look a little bit better on the shelf. I have mildly OCD tendencies.
A little bit of mapping. So I've done the Nocenti run a few times, and it's on my kind of shopping list right now. But I don't think I'll go complete. I think I'm gonna include some other stuff and really just focus on like one main storyline in there to bind. And that's what I've kind of been doing with most books is avoiding that completist.
Right.
Like, just so you know, I have 4 app updates available for my Creative Cloud. But yeah, it's like instead, like I don't need every issue of Daredevil. It's fine, you know, like some people do. Some people want it, but I'm never going to read the whole thing. But I'm going to check out this story, or this art sticks out for me, or the time periods. I've been focused on like, what's that one snip, you know, right in the area. So some of that Ramita Junior arts, especially around 250 or so.
Yeah. I mean,
was key for me.
I've read some of his most recent stuff with Bendis on. Is it? I don't know if it's either Superman or Action.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
not sure which. His stuff on Daredevil with Nocenti, however you pronounce it. Apologies for butchering your name. His Daredevil work, both there and on the original Man Without Fear, is the best. It's so much better than it is now for the stuff that he's doing now. And I don't know if it's just differences in inkers or, you know, the amount of time he has per issue or what, but that was like, in my opinion, that kind of Daredevil era of his work is kind of like peak Romita Jr.
Yeah, I think you hit it with the inker. I mean, and also like, you know, that was
That was pretty legendary.
Yeah, I mean that was a long time ago that he was doing Daredevil, and so to think he would be trying to do the exact same thing,
absolutely,
you know, 32 years later, you know, that's like this. Of course, he's going to be trying new things and experimenting and trying out different styles and things, and so I give him a lot of, you know, leeway. His storytelling is still fantastic, but Al Williamson did a lot for that run. You know, I think his inking over Romita was probably the difference for me compared to other books, even other Daredevil work that he did. You know, when Williamson wasn't the inker, it suffered. So yeah, and I don't know, Klaus Janson. Not my favorite inker over Romita for whatever reason. I think he did the Superman, the most recent Superman.
Right.
So
I think you're right.
Yeah. So all right. So you've got 2-volume Nocenti in the works.
In the works.
So that's your first foray into volume 1.
Yeah, actually. So it's funny because, like I said, so I tracked those down last summer, and got that whole project put together and you know, designs created and whatnot and shipped off. And then, you know, January is when I kind of like really delved into the whole, I got to collect all volume 1. So guess what I'm going to have to do? I'm going to have to go get all those Nocenti issues again because I cut them all up the first time. But it is what it is. It's all good. It'll just give me something else to look for. But just in case anybody else is curious as to why one might want to bind that run, Ann Nocenti has written the 3rd most issues of Daredevil ever of any creator. The only two people that have written more than her on that character are 1, Mark Waid, 2, Brian Michael Bendis. So that, and her run is not presently entirely recollected in any other format. These epic collections are getting close.
Yeah.
But even after the one coming out this summer or this fall, if there's a bit of a delay, they're still going to be missing about 12 issues at the beginning of a run. So for me, being the Daredevil fan I am, I was just like, you know what? Like, that's just too big and important of a run not to have on my shelf. So That
Yeah.
and it looks pretty for the most part. So
Yep. She's it's crazy to think that she's the third, and who the other two are. Like, if with no research at all, you'd think Miller.
Mhm.
I mean, if you were very unfamiliar, you might throw Stan Lee out there just because he wrote everything, But Brubaker, Bendis, Miller.
And they are all in the top 10.
Yeah. I mean, top 10. I mean, but Daredevil's one of the few characters that really he's known. Like, if you want to make a long run,
Mm-hmm.
he's a title that you would jump on. So I think that was one of Brubaker and Bendis.
Times, for sure.
Oh yeah. He's low enough under the radar that your sales are going to be pretty consistent as long as you're pretty good. But it's not going to be, Spider-Man, where if you're not selling a ton of books, they're going to boot you. So you can tell a big story, a long story. Chichester.
He's up there. You know what? Hold on one second.
You've got your spreadsheet, yeah.
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 So the funny thing is, years ago when I read through the entirety of, I started. It took me probably 4 years because I'll go through a binge of reading something and then just kind of burn out.
Yep.
And then I have to go on to something else for a while. But like over the course of about 4 years, I plowed my way through one all the way through. I think it was midway through Wade at the time when I read everything.
Wow.
Anyway, and sometime after that, I decided to put this spreadsheet together, and it's just, again, people can go to my blog and find it and just poke around, and that'll do a lot more than me just wasting more time talking about it. But when I was compiling all the data for that, that's when I started keying in on who wrote how many issues. And I've got a whole separate tab for, just like weird little, here's the numbers, let's crunch them, and who's done what. And she's trying to see here. Okay, Mark Waid has written 58 issues. Brian Michael Bendis wrote 55. Nocenti 54. Stan Lee 53. Charles Soule 47. Chichester 44. Brubaker 41. Frank Miller 33. Jerry Conway at 30, and Denny O'Neil at 27. That's the top 10.
Yeah.
As far as most issues goes. And then Waid, Soule, and Brubaker are the longest uninterrupted runs. So there
used to be a lot more fill-in issues back in the day. So back in the 80s, 90s. So,
but if you think about it, it's even almost more impressive that from 1998 you had Kevin Smith for like 8 issues,
5 people total.
You had David Mack for 4 or 5, and then Bendis jumped on for 3. Then we had that Gale arc, and then Bendis for forever, and then with one arc of Mack in between, splitting it up, and then you had Brubaker and Lark forever, and then you had Waid, Rivera, Sammy forever, Soule and his crew with Garney and those guys forever. And I mean, it's just like you said a few minutes ago, you get on to Daredevil and you just go. Fortunately, they've all been really good.
I won't call out the better Daredevil fan on the chat here, but you totally just missed our boy Diggle. You just totally skipped him,
You're right. I did, and I should be ashamed because I actually am a supporter of his run and the whole Shadowland.
Yep.
Anybody who has come across conversations in various Facebook groups will know that I've said this on a number of occasions. Diggle's material leading up to and including Shadowland may not be as good as Bendis or Brubaker or before or Wade after, but it's still pretty good. The problem with Shadowland and why it gets a bad rap is because you got all these tie-ins and mini-series and whatever that are wholly unnecessary.
You've got a whole book of tie-ins. This is just the tie-ins. Yeah, I'm with you on Shadowlands. Like the main run, the story was cool. I liked it. Like Daredevil in Charge of the Hand. Like I don't know what could be better.
It's really cool, and I appreciate you calling me out for missing that, because I should have known better. I'm actually kind of embarrassed that I did, but yeah, you know.
No, it's easily
it's almost
easily skipped
my time. I'm getting old. Bad memory. I don't know.
Yeah, no, like I said, we got 3 questions and we hit them all. So yeah, I just friendly. I'll call you out on Diggle.
I'm totally fine with it. I have no problems whatsoever. You can call me out on all kinds of other crap I said. I don't know.
All right, so I'll leave it with this, and we can wrap up from this Daredevil chat that also did binding. Do you have a book?
Sorry, folks.
Yeah. Do you have a book in the works?
Well, I mean,
aside
from the Nocenti set,
yeah, like one that you're working on.
So probably about a month and a half ago, I was just happening into not what I consider my LCS, but another local shop here in town, and I was flipping through their dollar bins and came up with 60 some odd issues, almost half of the issues I would need for a Peter David X Factor Investigations bind. So at $1 a pop, I was like, okay, twist my arm, because I've kind of been I read that years ago when it first came out. Unfortunately, sold all those issues off because at the time had no idea that I'd get into this thing called custom binding. So I have started the process of reaccumulating those issues. I have completely wiped out every local shop within a 10-mile radius of my town. Was hoping to bang out a whole bunch of those at Heroes Con this year, but that's not going to happen. It got canceled today.
Yeah.
Again, totally understandable. I get it. Makes all the sense in the world. And actually, to be perfectly honest, I'm kind of glad they did, because if they hadn't, then I would have had to make the decision, and I don't know that I would have made the right one. So
Ghostbusters gear.
Yeah, exactly. Just full hazmat suit.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of next on my list, I think, is the more recent Peter David X Factor, the Madrox centric one.
Excellent.
And then actually just a day or two ago, since we had been chatting back and forth on Facebook, I realized that I had a box of old Dreamwave Transformers, a short box full of that in the garage, and I think I had just about all of their issues before they got canned and stopped publishing and whatever. So that might be another thing, just because I don't know that that's something that I'd be able to move very easily. Excuse me. On eBay or whatever, I might just throw those into a couple binds and be done with it. So X Factor and potentially Dreamwave era Transformers.
Okay. Cool. Well, yeah, it's we've gone way longer than anybody I think wanted to listen or watch this.
Probably. And apologies for killing your channel, because nobody's going to want to hear me ramble for an hour on Daredevil, but it's what happened. So.
There's got to be at least two people out there who
They're right here.
Yeah, I know.
Right here.
That's fine. We'll watch it. We'll get 2 views in. Nobody's watching now at this point, so we can say
you
whatever we
can
want.
edit it and cut it down to like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up. Thanks. Like I said, just reaching out to people who have gotten into comic binding, web storage opportunity that popped up there. Yeah. So thank you for joining, talking Daredevil, and
Appreciate
we
it.
could
Thanks for having me.
continue this for a long, long time. So
Yeah, well, we can do that offline where
yeah.
we don't need to bore other people with it.
There we go. So, all right. Well, with that, we will go ahead and wrap up.